unfold.
Okay, let's get into it. For this deep dive, I want you to picture something. You're standing in the middle of the Sonoran Desert in Arizona, and rising up out of the landscape is this.
Oh,
It's an impossible structure.
it really does look like something from another planet.
Right, a colossal ziggurat, but it's made entirely of glass and white steel, spanning, what, over 3 acres?
3.14 acres, to be precise.
And this is Biosphere 2.
Mm-hmm.
It was a $150 million gamble.
A huge one. A bet that humanity could literally build a replica of spaceship Earth. A second biosphere.
A completely self-contained world.
Exactly.
Right.
The ambition was, it was astronomical. They conceived it as a working model for our own planet systems, but also as a prototype, a proof of concept for colonies on Mars.
And the goal was what they call material closure.
Right. 8 people, more than 3,800 species of plants and animals, all sealed inside for 2 full years. Nothing in or out except sunlight and electricity.
And right there, from the very start, you get the core conflict of this whole story, this duality. Because on one hand, it was an absolute engineering triumph. To build a structure that size and make it virtually airtight, it's incredible.
The leak rate was lower than the International Space Station's relative to volume. It was a masterpiece of sealing technology.
But on the other hand, it was a spectacular, almost immediate biological and sociological train wreck.
A complete unraveling. It was, a failed utopia in the most literal sense.
And that's really our mission for you today. The summary you usually hear is just, oh, Biosphere 2, the thing that failed.
It's so much more complicated and, frankly, more interesting than that.
So we're going to go way past that simple judgment. We're going to dissect the intricate, granular mechanisms of the collapse, specifically during that first mission from 91 to 93.
Yeah, we're talking about bizarre geochemical reactions that no one saw coming, an accidental human experiment in starvation, weird pest invasions, and, maybe most compellingly, the complete implosion of the crew into
Warring tribes.
literally warring tribes, yeah.
Because what makes this story still so relevant, so important decades later, isn't just the spectacle of it.
Not at all.
It's the profound, incredibly expensive, and frankly painful lesson it taught us about the planet we're already on, about Biosphere 1.
That's the real takeaway. The experiment proved, maybe more definitively than anything before it, just how insanely chaotic and complex and sensitive even a simplified version of Earth's ecology really is.
The builders thought they could just follow a recipe. Add species, add water, add sunlight.
Like an IKEA set for a planet. But they ended up exposing how little we actually understand about all the hidden processes, the buffers, the invisible services that keep our own world stable.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, because the origin story of this whole thing is, arguably, the strangest part of the entire affair.
It really is.
This wasn't born out of NASA or MIT or some big government science agency. It came from a countercultural theater group.
It sounds like fiction, but it's true. To get why the mission operated the way it did, with this intense loyalty and ultimately this fatal rigidity, you have to trace it back to this avant-garde group from the 60s called the Synergists.
Or the theater of all possibilities.
Right, and their leader, the intellectual architect of the whole vision, was a man named John P. Allen.
And what a character. The sources paint him as this incredible mix of things. A metallurgist by training, a poet, and he had an MBA from Harvard.
And he operated under the pseudonym Johnny Dolphin. You can't make this stuff up. A poet, MBA metallurgist running a theater troupe in San Francisco.
It's a bizarre resume. And their philosophy was really unique for the time.
It was. They completely rejected the anti-materialism that was so popular in the counterculture of the 60s and 70s.
So not your typical back to the land commune.
Not at all. They embraced what they called ecopreneurship. It was this belief that you could and should blend ecological sustainability with really aggressive capitalist enterprise.
Your method was learn by doing.
Exactly. Not academic. It was all about intense, rigorous physical labor-building ranches, sailing ships mixed with theatrical performance. They were very influenced by futurists like Buckminster Fuller.
And this created a very specific kind of group culture, didn't it?
Incredibly specific. It was intensely hierarchical, almost military-like in its discipline at times, and just profoundly loyal to John Allen's vision. And this is the critical context you need to understand the crew.
Because the 8 biospherians who got sealed inside weren't chosen by some independent scientific panel.
No, they were largely handpicked from this inner circle of synergists, people who had trained and worked together for years on other demanding projects, like building and sailing the research ship, the Heraclitus.
So on one hand, that loyalty gives you the cohesion to actually get this monumental thing built.
It absolutely does. You can't discount that.
But on the other, for a scientific experiment of this scale, being that insulated from outside critique seems, well, fatal.
It turned out to be. The sources are really clear on this point. Because they were this tight-knit private group, they could completely bypass the slow, conservative peer review process of, federal science grants.
Which let them move fast and dream big.
Incredibly fast, but it also meant that some really critical, unexamined flaws, and we're going to get into the soil composition and the lack of wind, were just baked in from the start. There was no one to say, hey, have you thought about this?
And none of this would have happened without the money. We're talking $150 million.
An astonishing figure for a private science venture at the time.
And it came from one person, Edward Perry Bass, a scion of a Texas oil dynasty. He became a follower of Allen's philosophy and just wrote the checks.
He founded Space Biosphere Ventures, or SBV, and funded the whole thing.
But that private money came with strings attached, right? It created this commercial pressure.
A huge pressure. Biosphere 2 wasn't just a lab. It was designed to be a massive international tourist attraction. They were planning to license the technology. That commercial need for a good story was constantly at odds with the scientific need for transparent reporting of failures.
Which set the stage for some pretty devastating PR disasters down the line.
Absolutely, when things inevitably started to go wrong.
So you have this project founded on this bizarre mix of poetry, high finance, and a kind of cult-like loyalty. It's amazing it got built at all.
It is. But let's pivot now from the philosophy to the thing itself, the physical reality of the structure.
Okay, let's talk about the engineering.
Yeah.
Because the structure was a monster of technical achievement.
Truly. That central mission was achieving what they called material closure, sealing the system off completely. No gas, no water, no material in or out.
And they got incredibly close to succeeding on that front. The engineering feats are mind-boggling.
Let's start from the ground up. The entire 3.14-acre facility was built on top of a massive 500-ton welded stainless steel liner.
Basically a giant steel bathtub.
Exactly, to stop any exchange of water or gas with the desert soil underneath. Total isolation.
And then the glass and steel frame itself. The seal.
They developed their own proprietary silicone glazing system, and the result, when they measured it, was a leak rate of less than 10% of the air volume per year.
Okay, you have to put that number in context for us. How good is that?
It's unbelievably good. A typical office building can exchange its entire air volume several times a day. Even the ISS, for its size, has a higher relative leak rate. This was, a landmark achievement in hermetic sealing.
But that perfect seal creates an immediate, massive problem.
A huge one.
Pressure. You've got this airtight glass box in the Arizona desert. The sun beats down, the air inside heats up. It expands.
And then at night, the temperature plummets, the air contracts. If that expanding and contracting air has nowhere to go, the daily pressure change would just, or buckle the steel frame, it would destroy the structure.
And their solution is maybe the most iconic part of the whole complex. The two giant white geodesic domes off to the side. The lungs.
And they weren't just architectural flourishes. They were a critical and actually very clever safety mechanism.
Explain how they worked.
They were ingenious, really. Basically giant, low-tech pneumatic regulators. Inside each lung was this massive 16-ton aluminum disc. And it was attached to the walls of the dome by a huge, flexible, synthetic rubber membrane.
Okay, so it's a giant weight on a rubber sheet.
Pretty much. So as the air in the main biosphere heated up and expanded during the day, it would flow through tunnels into these lungs, and it would push that huge aluminum disc up.
And then at night?
At night, when the air cooled and contracted, the sheer 16-ton weight of that disc would push the air back into the biosphere. It was completely passive, no electricity, just gravity and temperature.
That's brilliant.
But here's the most clever part of the design. The whole system was engineered to keep the internal air pressure just slightly above the external atmospheric pressure.
It had positive pressure. Why is that so important?
Yeah, because it meant if any microscopic leak did occur somewhere in that massive structure, the air would always flow out, never in. It was a guarantee that no outside contaminants, no foreign air, could ever get in and compromise the experiment.
That detail is just fantastic. It shows how obsessed they were with protecting the integrity of the data.
They were, but, keeping 3,800 species alive takes more than just a big bottle.
Right. There was a whole world underneath the world we could see.
The technosphere, the mechanical underworld. This hidden complex had 26 massive air-handling units, or AHUs, constantly circulating the air.
So while it was biologically closed, it was completely dependent on technology. What were those AHUs fighting against?
Mainly humidity and temperature stratification. You've got a rainforest biome right next to a desert biome. Without constant, massive air circulation, the humidity from the rainforest would have instantly turned the desert into a swamp.
It was about homogenizing the atmosphere.
Exactly. They were trying to make sure the gas mix was uniform so you didn't get dangerous pockets of CO2 building up.
And what about water? That also had to be a closed loop.
The water recycling system was maybe their most elegant piece of tech. All the wastewater from humans and animals went into anaerobic tanks. From there, it was filtered through a specially designed marsh with aquatic plants and microbes.
And that cleaned it.
It cleaned it so well that the resulting water was pure enough to use for irrigating the crops. Nothing was wasted. It was a beautiful, self-contained cycle.
So to sum up the structure, it was materially closed, a masterpiece of engineering. But we need to be clear about the energy.
A critical distinction. The facility was energetically open. It was completely reliant on an external natural gas power plant pumping in 5.7 megawatts of electricity to run all those fans and pumps and computers.
Yeah, of course, the sun.
And the constant external energy of the sun filtering through the glass. The life inside couldn't power itself. It needed a huge industrial umbilical cord.
Okay, we have the container. Now let's talk about what they put inside it. These 7 condensed planetary ecologies.
Their whole strategy was something they called species packing.
Which sounds a little chaotic.
It was. They introduced over 3,800 species with the expectation that, natural selection would take over, there would be a lot of attrition, and a robust, self-regulating community of survivors would emerge.
So they were trying to build Earth's biomes in miniature.
That was the goal. You had the wilderness biomes. The biggest was the tropical rainforest, about 20,000 square feet, built around an artificial 50-foot mountain.
And that was supposed to be the main engine, right?
Yeah.
The lungs of the system.
The primary engine of photosynthesis, yeah. Pumping out the oxygen. Then you had the ocean.
A 700,000-gallon saltwater tank.
Almost, yeah. 2.6 million liters, simulating a Caribbean coral reef. And it even had its own wave machine.
Incredible.
And a mangrove marsh, a savanna grassland, and the desert.
And the desert is where we see the first big, immediate failure.
Right away. It was modeled on a Baja, California fog desert, supposed to be very dry. But because all the biomes were connected by the air circulation system, all that moisture from the rainforest and the ocean just migrated over.
So the desert got rained on, essentially.
Constantly. It quickly morphed from a desert into more of a chaparral or a grassland. It was impossible to keep these little climates separate when they were all breathing the same air.
A perfect example of how the lines on their floor plan meant nothing to the actual ecology.
Exactly. And then you have the most critical area for the humans, the anthropogenic biome, the farm.
The intensive agricultural biome, or IAB.
This was their lifeline. A half-acre, hyper-intensive organic farm, meticulously engineered with crop rotation, everything. This little patch of dirt had to feed 8 people completely for 2 years.
Along with their domestic animals, some pigs, goats, chickens.
Also bought dwarf pigs and African pygmy goats, yeah.
And into this world on September 26, 1991 with the 8 Biosphereans.
Let's name a few of the key players. You had Dr. Roy Walford, the medical officer. He was a respected UCLA professor and a leading global expert on caloric restriction.
Which would become, ironically, very relevant.
Very relevant. You also have Jane Poynter, who was in charge of the farm, the IAB, and Mark Nelson, the communications lead and a key figure in the Synergist leadership.
So they go in, wearing their matching blue jumpsuits, cameras flashing, full of hope.
The whole world was watching.
And the moment that door sealed, the mission starts to devolve. It goes from this grand scientific exploration into just a desperate, day-to-day struggle for survival.
And the first thing to break, the first catastrophic failure, wasn't the plants or the people, it was the air itself.
A fundamental geochemical imbalance that they had completely missed.
Which brings us to the science of the crash. The system was supposed to be this beautiful, balanced cycle. Plants make oxygen, animals and people breathe it. Simple.
Except the oxygen levels started to plummet. and fast.
The decline was just relentless. They started at 20.9% oxygen, which is normal for Earth. And over the next 16 months, it just dropped and dropped until it hit a dangerously low 14.2%.
Let's put that 14.2% number in perspective for you. Living in that atmosphere is the physiological equivalent of living permanently at an altitude of 13,400 feet.
That's about 4,080 meters.
Yeah.
Higher than many mountain base camps. And they had zero time to acclimatize.
So they were doing back-breaking farm labor day in and day out on top of a mountain.
The physical toll was immense. Debilitating fatigue, constant shortness of breath, and eventually, as we'll see, it led to serious cognitive problems.
But here's the mystery that baffled the scientists on the outside. In any normal system, if you burn oxygen, you produce a proportionate amount of carbon dioxide.
Right. It's a one-to-one molecular exchange, basically.
They lost almost 7% of their oxygen. If all of that had turned into CO2, the concentration inside should have skyrocketed to, almost 70,000 parts per million.
Which would have been instantly fatal. They would have suffocated.
But the CO2 levels, while they were high and uncomfortable, they only fluctuated between about 2,000 and 4,000 ppm.
High enough to give you headaches, but survivable. So the great mystery was, where was all the carbon going? If the oxygen was being eaten, but the CO2 wasn't building up, where was it?
And this is where the project, through its failure, leads to this profound geochemical discovery.
Solved by scientists on the outside, like Jeff Severinghaus. The aha moment was realizing the building itself was part of the reaction.
The structure was acting like a giant chemical scrubber.
Exactly. Let's walk through the two parts of that loop. First, what was eating all the oxygen?
The soil.
The soil. They had packed the biomes with incredibly rich organic compost to make sure the plants would grow well, but that fertile soil fueled an absolute explosion of soil microbes, far more than they ever expected.
And these microbes were just breathing like crazy.
Breathing ferociously, consuming oxygen and pumping out massive amounts of CO2, so the very foundation of their ecosystem was suffocating them.
Okay, that's step one. The microbes make the CO2. Now step two, where to go?
It went into the walls. The carbon sink was the tons and tons of freshly poured concrete in the structure.
Which was still curing.
Still curing, yeah. And concrete contains a lot of calcium hydroxide. This calcium hydroxide reacted aggressively with all that excess CO2 in the atmosphere, and it formed stable calcium carbonate.
Limestone.
And water. The atmosphere was literally turning the walls into limestone.
The chemical equation tells the whole story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Calcium hydroxide plus carbon dioxide yields calcium carbonate and water.
KOH2 plus CO2, right arrow, KO3 plus H2O. The microbes eat the oxygen, turned it to CO2, and the walls scrubbed that CO2 out of the air. It created a net loss of breathable gas.
That is just an unbelievable, unforeseen feedback loop. They designed this perfect biological life support system and completely forgot that the building itself was a giant reactive chemical in the equation.
It's a terrifying lesson in complexity. When you force geology, biology, and the atmosphere into a tiny sealed box.
And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, an external factor made everything worse.
The weather.
The winter of 1991-92 was one of the cloudiest on record in Arizona.
It was a huge El Niño year. And this was devastating for them because the glass and the steel space frame already blocked about half of the usable light for the plants.
The photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR.
Right. So the plants were already light-starved. Then this heavy cloud cover comes along and reduces it even more, crippling their ability to photosynthesize.
So they couldn't make enough oxygen to replace what the microbes were eating.
The rainforest, which was supposed to be the great oxygen producer, actually became a net consumer of oxygen because there wasn't enough light.
It was a perfect storm. The chemistry inside was eating the air, and the climate outside was preventing them from making more.
And beyond the atmosphere, the biological systems, the life inside, also began to collapse in this very specific, very telling way.
The things they needed to live died.
And the things they didn't want, the pests, they absolutely thrived.
Let's start with the extinctions. The most critical failure for their food supply was the pollinators.
The bees, the moths, the hummingbirds, they all died out almost immediately.
Why? Was it just the glass-blocking UV light?
That was a huge part of it, yeah. Bees especially need UV light to navigate. The glass basically blinded them, they got disoriented, couldn't find food, and the colonies just collapsed.
And the effect of that was?
Disastrous. Any crop that needed an insect to pollinate it just failed. The crew, already starving and exhausted from lack of oxygen, had to start hand-pollinating plants for hours every day just to get any food at all.
And it wasn't just the insects.
No. Of the 25 vertebrate species they put in, 19 went extinct. The system was just too small, too fragile. It couldn't handle the rapid swings in atmosphere and humidity.
So in contrast to that fragility, you have the tramp species, the invasive pests.
They did great. The whole facility was overrun by one species in particular, Paratrechina longicornis, the longhorn crazy ants.
And these weren't just a nuisance. They were a genuine threat to the system.
A huge threat. They were probably brought in accidentally on some soil. Their population exploded. They completely wiped out the native ant species that were supposed to be there.
And they damaged the crops.
They did. They actually protected other pests, like scale insects, which further damaged the plants in the IAB. On top of that, you had a cockroach population boom. The place became a haven for the toughest, most adaptable generalist species.
But there's one failure that I think teaches one of the most profound lessons about ecology and resilience. The trees.
Ah, yes. The trees in the rainforest biome.
They grew really fast.
Right.
Because of the high humidity and all the CO2.
They shot up, but they were weak, structurally unsound. They would just snap under their own weight long before they were mature.
And this failure gave us a classic botanical case study, a concept called
Thicomomorphogenesis. It's a wonderful word.
And it's all about the idea that resilience requires stress.
It's the lesson of the wind.
Explain that for us. What was missing inside the biosphere?
Well, they had air circulation from the AHUs, but it was gentle. What they didn't have was wind. Chaotic, high-velocity gusts that push a tree around.
And that pushing matters.
It's everything. In nature, when wind stresses a young tree, it triggers a chemical response. The tree starts producing what's called reaction wood, which has more lignin in it. It's tougher, more rigid. It's how a tree builds the strength to survive the next storm.
So because the trees inside Biosphere 2 lived in this perfectly calm, protected environment.
They never got that stress signal. Their HVAC system just moved air. It didn't create stress. So the trees put all their energy into growing tall, not strong.
They were optimized for height, not resilience.
Exactly. They grew tall and spindly and fragile, and then they just buckled. It perfectly encapsulates the complexity trap. They gave the trees all the right inputs, water, light, nutrients, but they missed the crucial process, the chaos of the wind that actually builds strength.
That is an incredible lesson. And it leads us right into the next major crisis, the human one, chronic starvation.
The failure of the farm, the IAB, turned the crew into unwilling test subjects for a groundbreaking physiological study.
This was the calorie restriction with optimal nutrition, or CRON, protocol. Championed by their own medical officer, Roy Walford.
A complete accident, but the data was invaluable.
Just how bad was the hunger? The sources say in the first 6 months they were averaging about 7,780 calories a day.
And that's while doing 70 or 80 hours a week of hard physical farm labor. It's an insane deficit. They were basically climbing Everest while trying to run a farm.
The diet they ended up with was nutrient-dense, lots of vegetables and beans, but extremely low in fat and protein.
About 10% fat.
What did that constant state of hunger do to them psychologically?
It was devastating. They developed what they called starvation neurosis. Food became a total obsession. They licked their plates clean. Jane Poynter talks about them eating peanut shells just for the fiber, just to feel physically full for a few minutes.
A miserable existence.
Yeah.
But despite that psychological toll, the physiological data they collected is still considered a landmark.
It is. It's one of the only long-term studies of the CRON diet in healthy humans. And the medical results were staggering.
They lost a lot of weight.
Men lost about 19% of their body weight, women about 13%. But more importantly, their cardiovascular health markers went through the roof. It completely validated Walford's theories.
Give us some of the hard numbers on that.
Their total cholesterol dropped by over 30%, from an average of 191 down to an unbelievably low 123. Their blood pressure plummeted from 109 over 74 to 89 over 58.
So their bodies just adapted. They became hyper-efficient.
Hyper-efficient metabolic machines, yeah. Squeezing every last bit of energy out of every morsel of food.
So the human body proved resilient. But the human social structure? Not so much.
The social fabric completely disintegrated. The combined stress of the low oxygen and the constant hunger just amplified every small personality difference, every ideological disagreement into open hostility.
They split into two factions.
Two hostile, warring factions who eventually stopped speaking to each other.
Okay, let's identify the two sides. First, there was Group A, the Loyalists.
Right. This group was led by Mark Nelson and was fiercely loyal to John Allen and the external mission control. For them, the absolute ideological purity of the closed system was the highest priority.
They saw the other group as giving up.
As compromising the mission, yeah.
And Group B was labeled the alarmists. This included Roy Walford and Jane Poynter.
This group started pushing for more transparency. They wanted to tell the world about the oxygen problem, the food shortages. They argued that the crew's health and the scientific data were more important than the original dogma.
And by the second year, it was just a psychological Cold War inside this tiny glass world.
Total breakdown. They would only communicate through written notes or during essential work tasks, all while living in the same small habitat. The tension culminated in that infamous incident where one crew member, Abigail Alling, reportedly spit in Jane Poynter's face.
It's just a complete collapse of social norms under that kind of pressure.
It's a textbook case of what happens to groups in extreme isolation and stress. They abandon rational problem solving and revert to these primal us versus them dynamics.
And the scientific integrity of the whole project took a massive hit really early on, long before the crew war broke out.
The duffel bag incident, October 1991.
Only a few weeks into the mission, Jane Poynter cut the tip of her finger off in a piece of farm equipment.
A rice threshing machine, yeah. She had to be evacuated for emergency surgery.
And when she came back a few hours later, she brought a duffel bag with her.
Right. And Mission Control swore up and down it was just computer parts and plans. But the media ran with the story that it was contraband. Food, supplies, something to prop up the failing experiment.
And whether it was true or not, the damage was done.
The perception of fraud was sealed. From that moment on, every piece of data that came out was viewed with suspicion. It totally destroyed their credibility.
But the final surrender of the project's core idea didn't come from bad PR. It came from life-threatening biological necessity.
The atmosphere just became unsustainable. By January of 1993, the oxygen hit that critical 14.2% level.
And the physical symptoms were getting dangerous.
It was moving beyond just fatigue. It was becoming cognitive impairment. Roy Walford, the doctor, admitted that his own brain was failing so badly from oxygen deprivation that he couldn't do simple math anymore.
He told Mission Control that they were risking permanent brain damage.
It crossed an ethical line, so they were forced to intervene. On January 14th, 1993, tanker trucks full of liquid oxygen pulled up to the facility.
And they just pumped it in.
23 tons of pure liquid oxygen injected into the system to restore a breathable atmosphere.
And the crew's reaction.
It was euphoric. Jane Poynter's quote is amazing. She said it was like she'd been 90 years old and now I was a teenager again. She said for the first time in months, she heard the sound of people running.
It saved their lives.
But it definitively killed the experiment's central claim. It was no longer a self-sustaining world. It was a terrarium on industrial life support.
And it wasn't just oxygen, was it? They had to start using chemical CO2 scrubbers, too.
Right. Another admission that the biological systems had failed to keep the atmosphere in balance.
So Mission 1 ends in September 1993. The crew comes out gaunt and psychologically damaged. The project is bleeding money.
Over $1 million a month. And Ed Bass, the funder, decides he needs to clean house.
And the person he hires to do that is, of all people, a young investment banker named Steve Bannon.
The very same. Bannon's job was to stop the financial bleeding and fix the PR nightmare.
And what was his conclusion?
He quickly decided that the original Synergist management team was the problem, their secrecy, their rigidity. So on April 1st, 1994, Bannon staged what was essentially a hostile takeover.
With federal marshals?
With federal marshals and sheriff's deputies. They showed up with restraining orders and physically barred John Allen and the founders from the site.
Which is just an insane escalation.
And the original crew members were furious. A few days after the takeover, two of them, Abigail Alling and Mark Fanthillo, broke back into the facility.
And they sabotaged it.
They deliberately smashed glass panels and opened the airlocks, physically breaking the hermetic seal for good.
What was their justification for destroying the very thing they had fought so hard to protect?
They claimed that the new Bannon-led management was incompetent and would endanger the second crew who had just been sealed inside. They saw it as a necessary act to prevent a worse disaster.
And that really was the end of the grand experiment.
The end of the closed system era, permanently.
So after all that chaos, all that money, what's the legacy? What did this magnificent failure actually teach us?
I think it's one of the most successful failures in the history of science. It failed its objective, but the lessons were indispensable.
Okay, let's synthesize those lessons for everyone. The first one is the buffer problem.
Right. Our planet, Biosphere 1, is stable because its buffers are massive. The oceans, the atmosphere, they can absorb huge fluctuations. Biosphere 2 is tiny. It was an island ecology. Any small imbalance, like a few extra soil microbes, led to a catastrophic rapid change.
The second lesson, the complexity trap.
You can't just build nature from a parts list. The failing trees, the invasive ants, they showed us that ecosystem services are these incredibly intricate processes that are almost impossible to replicate with engineering. You have to design for the chaos, not just the components.
And finally, the human factor.
The social breakdown proved that in these tiny, high-stress, isolated environments, social cohesion is every bit as fragile as the atmospheric chemistry.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? The structure is still there today, but it's not seen as a prototype for Mars anymore.
No, it's a monument to the staggering, overwhelming complexity and fragility of the Earth we already have. It proved that we're passengers on Biosphere 1, and we're not even close to being its masters.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want you to think back to that lesson from the trees. Thigmomorphogenesis, the idea that you need stress to build resilience.
Those trees, in their perfect, protected, calm environment, they grew tall, but they were weak. They snapped because they never had to fight against the wind.
So what does that teach you about our own systems, our own societies? If we try to remove all the stress, all the risk, all the chaos,
Do we just end up growing taller, but structurally weaker? The fate of those trees suggests that real lasting resilience only comes from being tested.
something to think about the next time you feel the wind push back. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Biosphere 2.